Welcome to The Explainer, everyone. Today, we are jumping straight into the high-stakes reality of environmental management. Look, we aren't just talking about paper compliance today, okay? We're talking about what actually happens when theory collides with a worst-case scenario right there on the production floor. So, let's decode ISO 14001:2026 by putting it through the ultimate stress test.
Picture this for a second. You're walking the facility floor, suddenly the alarms start blaring, and the ultimate stress test of your organization has just begun. A hazardous chemical tank has ruptured. In this exact second, your environmental management system, your EMS, well, it's no longer just a binder sitting dusty on a shelf. It is a live, breathing framework. And the only question that matters right now is, does it hold up or does it completely collapse?
Now, in a perfect scenario, like a coordinated emergency spill response drill, we see exactly what should happen. Operations secures the perimeter immediately. Maintenance isolates the valve to stop the flow. The environmental teams notify the regulators. You've got maintenance, operations, and environmental teams executing their precisely defined cross-functional roles without a single moment of hesitation or ambiguity. It's a beautiful thing to watch. But that level of flawless execution, it doesn't happen by accident. It proves that success isn't luck, it's engineered. And it's engineered through the strict architectural requirements of ISO 14001:2016.
Section 1. Defining the EMS scope, the foundation of readiness.
To reverse engineer exactly why that flawless drill works so well, we've got to pull all the way back to the beginning with Clause 4.3, the EMS scope. This determines the exact boundaries of your system. We're talking about physical locations, organizational units, and operational processes. Your scope is the map that ensures everyone knows precisely which activities are covered when an emergency strikes. Think about it. If that ruptured tank was sitting in a warehouse that was somehow magically excluded from your scope, well, your entire response plan just fell apart before it even started.
Now, here's a massive trap a lot of organizations fall into. It's called artificial scope limitation. This is when an organization attempts to limit their EMS scope to just the clean, quiet administrative offices, effectively ignoring the high-risk production floor just to make their audits easier. Nice try, but you absolutely cannot do this. Lead auditors will flag this as a major nonconformance immediately. Instead, you need a risk-based scope. That means including all significant environmental impacts, like that hazardous tank we talked about. Your scope must reflect the actual environmental realities of your operations, not just what's organizationally convenient.
Section 2. Integrating core processes, the blueprint. So that brings us to Clause 4.4, which gives us the blueprint for integrating core processes. It absolutely demands that environmental responsibilities are never siloed away in a single department. True integration means environmental management isn't just the job of the quote-unquote environmental team. Procurement owns sustainable sourcing. Maintenance owns preventative leak checks, meaning they are the ones out there catching a failing valve before it bursts. Operations owns waste minimization and spill response on the floor. Every single department actively owns a piece of the environmental framework. If environmental management is treated as this parallel, disconnected task, it's going to fail the second it's put under pressure.
Section 3. Defining roles and authorities, the actors.
Okay, so we have the blueprint, but who are the actors? Clause 5.3 dictates that formal roles, responsibilities, and authorities must be crystal clear to prevent total operational paralysis. Listen to this. I thought the environmental team handled tank inspections. That isn't a hypothetical. That is a real excuse from a logistics company that suffered a massive fuel spill. Why? Because the maintenance team assumed the environmental staff was inspecting the tanks, and the environmental staff assumed the maintenance team was doing it. Both teams pointed fingers. The equipment deteriorated, and the environment paid a very heavy price.
The absolutely crucial point here is that when roles overlap or authority is left undefined, you don't just get minor procedural hiccups, you get a full-on cascade of systemic failures. You get delayed emergency responses because no one knows who is actually authorized to make the call. You get fragmented communication and unmanaged risks. Ambiguity in your roles destroys your response times. It literally turns a small, manageable leak into a massive, headline-making regulatory violation.
Let's watch how this actually builds in a real audit scenario involving change management. In month 1, a chemical plant introduces some shiny new production technology. In month 2, the engineering team, operating in their own little silo, prioritizes pure production efficiency. But because roles are ambiguous, by month 3, the environmental specialists haven't even been brought in to evaluate the new process. The result? By month 4, air emissions completely exceed regulatory limits. This whole mess happens because the authority to evaluate the environmental impact of process changes just wasn't clearly defined between engineering and the environmental specialists.
Section 4. Planning for emergency risks. Clause 6.1.
To stop those cascading failures before they ever get a chance to start, Clause 6.1 comes into play. This clause requires organizations to systematically identify environmental aspects for every possible scenario through rigorous risk planning. You see, you can't just plan for a sunny day on the factory floor. Sure, evaluating your routine emissions during normal operations is great, we love that. But your risk planning must explicitly account for abnormal conditions too, like maintenance shutdowns or equipment startups. And critically, it has to account for worst-case emergency situations like fires, natural disasters, or that chemical tank rupture we started our day with. If your risk planning only looks at normal operations, your EMS is fundamentally blind to its absolute biggest threats.
Section 5. The audit reality check. So all of this sounds fantastic in theory, right? But how does an ISO lead auditor actually evaluate your readiness when they walk through your front doors? Let me tell you, auditors aren't just sitting in a conference room drinking coffee and reading your manuals. Yes, documented roles are a third of the battle, but they are actively cross-referencing those documents with actual operational integration. They are out on the floor, doing scenario-based interviews, testing the awareness of your machine operators. If your documentation says the maintenance manager has the authority to shut down a line during a spill, you better believe the auditor is going to go ask that manager if they actually know they have that power. The system has to be alive in the minds of the people executing it.
Ultimately, what we are talking about here is that ISO 14001:2026 is driving a major shift in organizational culture. A weak system relies on reactive compliance, scrambling when something goes wrong and just assuming someone else is going to handle it. But a mature EMS, that creates proactive resilience. It builds robust structures where every single individual is empowered, thoroughly trained, and ready to execute predefined controls the second things go sideways.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a really critical question about your own operations. Think about this. If an emergency struck your facility today, like right now, would your cross-functional teams act immediately, or would they just assume someone else is responsible? Because when those alarms are blaring, ambiguity is your absolute biggest liability. Make sure your system is engineered for certainty. Thanks for joining me today, and I'll catch you next time.